Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom. How's it going?
Tony, very excited to be here. Even more excited to not be talking about college football playoff formats for the first time in what feels like about 17 episodes.
No, instead, we're going to get back to our other favorite thing to do, and that's talk about concerns and all of the concerning things about the Ohio State Buckeyes heading into the 2026 season. And we are now talking about the Ohio State defensive tackles, of which Buckeyes are replacing two starters, Tywan Malone, who actually was the starter last year. Edric started, I think, 4 games over the course of the year, but then finished as the starter in the playoffs. And obviously, the unanimous All-American nose tackle, Kayden McDonald, out. And that's where I want to start, Tom, with my concern. Not just losing Kayden McDonald, who was in his 1 year as a starter, just fantastic. He wasn't just a run stuffer. He was a penetrator. He was quick. He was, still think back to the Washington game where DeMond Williams starts to run by him. He's just like, no, get back over here. It's like the Mortal Kombat, come over here type of thing. And so you lose him. That's alone could just be the concern, but I'll go ahead and throw in the fact that you're replacing him essentially with John Walker from USF. So you're replacing a unanimous All-American with somebody who was a starter last year for UCF, and was not even third team All Big 12. Now, redshirt sophomore, Kayden McDonald was a junior. They're still the same class. Walker missed his second year with an injury, but I think the number one concern here is you're replacing a guy who has done some things, but not at the level of Kayden McDonald. But then, should you expect that?
Yeah, this is one that I looked at and went, well, I know what he's going to say here. And he's going to say, you can't replace Kayden McDonald. And the answer is no, you sure cannot replace Kayden McDonald. He was the first team All-American. Guess how many of those there were? 1. Guess how many of those there were that were not Kayden McDonald? 0. Can't do it. Can't replace him. So good luck with all that. Now, I think they did a good job going in the portal, getting someone who is a veteran. You're not bringing in a freshman and sort of crossing your fingers. You're bringing in someone who has done this at a reasonably high level in a major conference. You're bringing in someone who they have known since the recruiting days. So this is not someone who's completely unknown to them. You've got Will Smith coming back, and I think Will Smith can probably continue to play a little bit of a bigger role now this year. I think you have, they certainly raised the floor of what this season could be at the nose tackle position. But I don't think you've replaced Kayden McDonald, because I don't think you can replace Kayden McDonald. That was one of the best nose tackle seasons we've seen from someone at Ohio State for years, if not decades. So that's just, this is a little like trying to replace Caleb Downs. You're not going to replace Caleb Downs. You're just going to try and get as close as you can to sort of filling those shoes.
There's never been a nose tackle as productive as Kayden McDonald in a single season at Ohio State. Go back to, I think, one of his early games where he had 8 tackles, and I had to go back to Garrett Goebel in 2012, I think, the last time an Ohio State nose tackle had 8 tackles in a game. And so he finished with 65, which is just a few behind Caleb Downs. He's right near the top. 65 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and you're replacing him not just with John Walker, but John Walker comes in, 40 tackles last year. That's an active nose tackle, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack in 12 games, as opposed to the 14 for Kayden McDonald. So I think as you said, they've done as well as they could, but there's still going to be a drop off there, and other people are going to have to pick up the slack. My next concern, Tom. Yeah, go ahead. Do you want something?
No,
you need to say something?
You're good. Nope, okay. Go ahead.
My next concern here is, are Edric Houston and James Smith overrated? We know that they're going to play together. They've been, relatively productive. They've not yet, I'd say Edric Houston hasn't yet lived up to his hype, but he got better as the season went on. James Smith is another 6.5 sacks or so last year, 6.5 tackles for loss. Active, both, 20 plus tackles. We're just assuming they're going to be very good. And I've said it before, I think they're going to be very, very good. But there's also a side of me that's like, this is some, the assumptions are doing some heavy-ish lifting here. So my second concern, as I said, what if Edric Houston and James Smith are overrated at the 3-tech?
So I think this is one where I'm kind of doing the flip side of the nose tackle conversation, where you're not trying to replace a first team All-American here. You're replacing Tywone Malone with James Smith and Edric Houston as a second-year player with Edric Houston as a third-year player. I think it's reasonable to assume Edric Houston is a second-year player, injured his knee right at the start of fall camp, was really not 100%, I don't think, for a decent chunk of the season. Came on stronger later in the year, I think, as that knee got better. But I think it's reasonable to assume that a third-year Edric Houston is going to be better than a second-year Edric Houston. That's just how things tend to go for defensive linemen, especially interior defensive linemen. So I think you're better there. And then it's just Tywone Malone and James Smith. Looking at James Smith, I don't think James Smith is going to be like, oh, well, you can't fill Tywone Malone's role there. He should be, I think James Smith should be fine to at least be the equivalent of Tywone Malone, if not a little better than that. So this is one where I look at this one as not really a concern, because even if James Smith doesn't live up to the number one defensive lineman in the transfer portal ranking that I think it was 247, I think had him ranked as the top overall defensive lineman in the transfer portal. Even if he doesn't live up to that you can still be the fourth best or the fifth best interior defensive lineman in the transfer portal and still be a perfectly capable replacement for what they got out of Tywone Malone last year. And if you just sort of replace Malone with an equivalent production, and Edric Houston is better this year because he's older and healthier, then I think you're coming out ahead of where you were last year. And I think that the play they got out of 3-tech last year was perfectly fine. If it's better this year, that maybe helps make up for some of what you're maybe losing at the nose position.
I think you're seeing a pattern here in that I'm very high on the nose tackles, and it's kind of difficult to come up with some real legitimate concerns compared to some other positions. The third concern here, though, I think is legitimate, and that is depth and overall depth. I really like the top four with John Walker and Will Smith at nose and Edric Houston and James Smith at 3-tech. You've got Jason Moore in there trying to do what Tywone Malone did, basically, and be the guy that has everybody is just, it's just not going to happen. And then boom, it happens. But other than those five, you're just talking about four freshmen. And so like I'm not expecting necessarily any of the freshmen to do anything this year. They're all, none of them are supremely high rated where you would expect like, Kayden McDonald to come in, or Tyleek Williams, where I guess they weren't necessarily, top 50 players or anything like that, like a Michael Hall was, who ended up redshirting, but they get in spring and they show something, and maybe we'll see that. But I think depth overall, like I said, I like the top half, but you get below that, and as long as everybody stays healthy, you'll be fine. But if you have to get too far into that depth, then it gets to be a worry, say like over the course of, say, one or two of those guys go down for a game or two or three, you're going to be lacking, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is a legitimate concern, because it's not something that necessarily will show up, but if it shows up, it could be a really glaring issue. You've got a lot of guys who are probably developmental players on the interior of the defensive line among the incoming freshman class. Darius McKinley was a 3-star. Jameer Perez is a 3-star. He comes in, he's listed at 6'4", 360. He's someone I'll be very interested to see what that number is after Coach Mick has a month or so with him. But, Damari Simeon, he's a 4-star guy. Maybe he can come in and play a little bit. The name that honestly might be the most impactful, Emmanuel Ruffin is someone who's a possibility, comes in at 295. Maybe he can do something this year. I do wonder about Kari Wilder, who comes in at 260, top 100 player. He's someone who might be able to, if they decide they want to, he might be able to do the Edric Houston thing and move inside to 3-tech. Probably not, but it's at least a possibility. But you're looking at you really do kind of need Jason Moore to finally take that step forward that they've been waiting on, because there's no one proven behind him. And there's a lot of maybes, but relying on a true freshman to play in the interior of the defensive line, that's asking a lot as a true freshman. So I think that this is a legitimate concern. The fact that Jason Moore did come back, I'm sure Jason Moore could have gotten a clearer path to the playing field somewhere else. He's a Maryland guy. I'm sure if he went to Maryland, he would almost certainly be comfortably in the 2 deep, probably making a decent NIL check as Mike Locksley tries to sort of right the ship down there. I think they were sort of splashing the pot a little bit in the portal and recruiting to try and, basically avoid having to pay the Mike Locksley buyout there. Then sort of the same model that Wisconsin's following with Luke Fickell. So there probably was a path to something more for Jason Moore down closer to home. The fact that he's still at Ohio State tells me that he sees probably a path to something, and Ohio State sees a path to something for him. But you do need someone else outside of that top 4 to really take a step forward, whether it's Jason Moore or one of the freshmen, because they lost a bunch of guys to the portal this past offseason. Jarquez Carter. If Jarquez Carter was here, I think we're penciling Jarquez Carter into this conversation, but he hit the portal. They lost several other guys from the interior of that defensive line in the portal as well. So yeah, this is definitely a hole that I think is a legitimate concern and something they're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, lost their entire 2025 defensive tackle class of 3 guys, lost their entire defensive tackle class of 2024 and Eric Mensah. Not that I don't think Eric Mensah was ever going to play at Ohio State, but that's 4 guys right out and gone. So by definition alone, the depth chart took it. So there you go. Some thoughts on my concerns, which again, I know not the most concerning concerns that you're ever going to have to be concerned about, but just some things to keep in mind. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. Hit the bell to be notified. 5-star rating and review on the audio side is always appreciated. And as you guys know, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.